The torch hit the roof and the house started burning. 23 armed men in the yard, horses screaming, gunfire coming from 3 directions at once. And in the middle of all of it, a man in a wheelchair. No legs, no backup, nothing but iron brackets, a stolen rifle mount, and 40 years of knowing exactly how a mountain kills you before it does. He didn't flinch. He aimed, he fired, he reloaded, he fired again. Because 6 weeks ago, a widow with $14 and no good options had walked into an auction block and bought the one thing nobody else wanted, a broken man. And that broken man had just become the most dangerous thing in the valley. This is the story of what happens when the world throws away 2 people it thinks are finished, and what those 2 people build from the wreckage. It started at an auction, on the worst day of both their lives, and it ended with something nobody saw coming. The auction block smelled like horse sweat and cheap tobacco. And something else, something harder to name. The particular smell of people who've come to buy, and people who've come because they have no other choice. Nora Calloway was the second kind. She stood at the edge of the crowd with her arms crossed over her chest and her jaw set at the angle that meant she'd already made a decision and wasn't interested in discussing it. $14 in her coat pocket. Counted twice that morning. Counted again on the wagon ride into town, because that's what you do when $14 is everything you have left in the world and winter is 6 weeks out and the fence line on the north pasture looks like it was built by someone who'd never seen a fence before, which her late husband Harold could not. God rest him. The man could not build a fence to save his life, or hers as it turned out. Around her the crowd shifted and murmured, and did what crowds always do. Talked too loud, laughed too easy, and pretended not to notice things they were absolutely noticing. 3 women from the church circle stood together near the water trough. One of them glanced at Nora and then glanced away so fast it was almost impressive. Nora noticed. She always noticed. She just stopped letting it mean something somewhere around the time she turned 34 and realized that other people's opinions of her body were frankly not her problem to solve. The auctioneer called out Lot 14. A broad-shouldered man stepped up onto the platform and bids started flying before he'd even turned around. $8 a month. 9. The rancher from the Eastern Valley got him for 11 and looked satisfied about it. Nora watched and waited. She'd come here with a specific kind of math in her head. The kind of math that desperate people get very good at very fast. She needed someone who could work harder than $14 was worth. Someone who could read the land. Fix what needed fixing. Get through the winter without requiring her to explain herself every 5 minutes. What she did not need was someone who would look at her, at all of her, at the specific shape of her grief and her body and her stubbornness and decide she needed managing. She'd had that. For 11 years. It was fine. Harold was fine. He just had opinions about things that weren't his opinions to have. She was done with that particular arrangement. Lot 17 went for $7. Lot 18 for $9.50. Nora's jaw tightened with each one. More ranchers here than she'd expected. More competition. The other widows in the crowd looked like they were doing the same math she was doing and coming up short in the same places. Then the auctioneer called Lot 19, and everything went quiet. Not the good kind of quiet, not the respectful kind, the ugly kind. The kind that happens when people see something they don't know how to look at directly, so they go very still and wait for someone else to react first. A man was being wheeled out onto the platform in a chair. Not a fine chair. A rough thing made of wood and iron, the wheels uneven, one of them catching on a plank and requiring the man pushing it to jolt it forward with his hip. The man in the chair didn't react to the jolt, didn't look up, just sat there with his hands loose in his lap and his head tilted forward at the particular angle of someone who has stopped caring whether anyone is looking at him. His name, the auctioneer announced with the tone of someone telling a story he found mildly amusing, was Brackett Crane, and the crowd recognized it. Nora could feel the recognition move through them. A ripple, a murmur. Because if you'd lived in this territory for more than 2 years, you'd heard of Brackett Crane. The stories had a specific texture, the kind of stories that get told in bunkhouses and feed stores and around fires when the work is done and someone needs reminding that men can still do remarkable things. Brackett Crane had tracked a wounded elk through a February blizzard for 9 miles and brought it back alone. Brackett Crane knew the Rocky Mountain terrain the way most men know the layout of their own kitchen, instinctively, completely, without having to think. Brackett Crane had spent 20 years in those mountains, and the mountains had never beaten him. Until 3 years ago, a rock slide. The details varied depending on who was telling it. Some said he'd been reckless. Some said the mountain had just decided it was time. Either way, the result sat in front of the crowd right now on a wooden chair with wheels that didn't track straight. The man who'd carried elk carcasses on his back couldn't carry himself across a room. "Strong arms," the auctioneer tried. His voice had gone slightly desperate. "Man's still got his arms, and those arms used to swing an axe better than anyone in 3 counties. Someone in the back of the crowd coughed. A horse stamped its hoof. "Do I hear 50 cents a month?" Silence. 25. More silence, the kind that echoes. And then from somewhere near the middle of the crowd, a man's voice, low enough to be deniable, loud enough to carry. "Give him to me, I'll use him as a doorstop." The laughter came fast. Not cruel exactly, or maybe exactly cruel. The kind of laughter that people reach for when they're uncomfortable and don't have anything better. Nora watched Beckett Crane's shoulders move, just barely, just a fraction of an inch, like he'd started to flinch and caught himself halfway through, like he'd gotten very, very good at catching himself halfway through, his hands still loose in his lap, curled, slowly, into fists. Nora uncrossed her arms. She moved before she had fully decided to. Her boots hit the dirt loud enough that the 2 women nearest her stepped back to make room. She walked through the crowd in a straight line because she'd learned a long time ago that crowds part for people who walk like they know exactly where they're going, even when they don't. She knew where she was going. "I'll take him," she said. The auctioneer blinked at her. "I'll take lot 19, Beckett Crane. I'm claiming him." The square went dead quiet for the second time. But this quiet was different. This was the quiet of people recalibrating, trying to figure out what they'd just seen and whether it was sad or brave or just plain strange. Someone laughed. Then someone else. Then the murmuring started, that low, rolling tide of people saying things just loud enough to be heard and just quiet enough to be deniable. "She's lost her mind. Poor woman, she must be truly desperate. What's she going to do with him, drag him around the yard?" Nora heard every single one. She had very good hearing. She'd always had very good hearing. Harold used to say it was her best quality, which told you something about Harold. She kept her eyes on the auctioneer until he cleared his throat and nodded, slightly uncomfortable, the way men get when a woman does something unexpected and they can't figure out how to be condescending about it. "No fee under the widow's provision," he said. She walked to the platform, climbed the 3 steps, stopped in front of the chair, and looked at Beckett Crane for the first time up close. He was looking back at her. His eyes were gray. Not pale gray, dark gray, the color of storm clouds that have already made up their minds. And they were sharp. Whatever the rest of him had lost in 3 years of sitting in that chair, it wasn't in his eyes. His eyes were furious. "I didn't ask for this," he said. His voice was rough, the particular roughness of someone who hasn't used it much. Low and flat and about as welcoming as a closed door in a blizzard. "I know," Nora said. "I don't want your pity." "Good, I'm not offering any." Something shifted in his face. Barely. So barely that if she hadn't been watching closely, she'd have missed it. "Then what are you offering?" he said. Nora looked at him for a moment. At the fists on the chair arms, at the fury in the gray eyes, at the man who'd been turned into a punchline this afternoon and had sat there and taken it because there was nothing else to do. "Work," she said, "if you've got any left in you." She walked around behind the chair and started pushing. The wagon ride back to the Callaway Ranch took 2 hours. They didn't speak for 1 hour and 53 minutes. Nora counted. Not because she was uncomfortable with silence. She'd lived alone for 5 months and had become extremely comfortable with silence, but because she found herself tracking the quality of it. This was not a comfortable silence. It was not a hostile silence. It was the silence of 2 people who have not yet figured out what they are to each other and are being careful about it. Beckett Crane sat as the wagon bed with his back against the side rail, his arms crossed, his jaw set, his eyes on the hills passing by with the particular attention of a man memorizing things, filing them away. Nora kept her eyes on the road and thought about fence posts. When they finally rolled up the drive, the sun was dropping behind the ridge, painting everything that specific tired gold that October does in this part of the country. The house was small. 2 rooms, a stone chimney, a porch that sagged on the left side where Harold had replaced 2 boards and done it wrong. The barn needed new shingles on the western face. Beyond that, 50 acres of scrub and pasture and a dry creek bed and a whole lot of what people kindly called potential and what Nora called work. She set the brake, climbed down, walked around to the back of the wagon. He was looking at the house. "This is it," she said. A long pause. "You really think this is going to work?" he said. Not a question exactly. The tone of someone assessing a situation they didn't choose. "No," Nora said, "but I'm doing it anyway." She lowered the gate and started wrestling his chair down. It was heavier than it looked, and awkward in the specific way of things built without much concern for the person who'd have to move them. By the time she had it on the ground, her arms were shaking slightly. She did not mention this. He did not thank her. "I'll need a ramp," he said, looking at the porch steps. "I'll build one tomorrow. And tonight? Tonight you manage." She walked toward the house, got 3 steps before she heard the wheels on the ground behind her. She didn't look back. Just listened to him work, the grunt of effort, the crunch of gravel under iron wheels, the low, vicious curse when a wheel caught on something. He kept going. She held the door. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked at them. 2 steps, 8 inches each. Nothing that would give a person a second's thought. "Can't do it," he said. "Tomorrow I know, tomorrow. And tonight?" Nora studied him, considered her options, crouched down and got her arms under his. "Don't," he started. "Shut up," she said pleasantly. She hauled him up. He was heavier than expected, all of it concentrated in his upper body, arms and shoulders, built for a life she couldn't quite imagine anymore now, carrying the full weight of a man who couldn't help himself up his own porch steps. By the time she got him through the door and lowered him onto the cot near the fireplace, her lower back was making its feelings very clearly known. She stepped back, caught her breath. He sat there with his fists clenched and a particular color in his face that she recognized as the specific red of a proud man being helped in front of himself. "I didn't ask for that," he said. "I know." She turned to go get the chair. "But you needed it, so." That first night he didn't eat. She made beans and cornbread, set a plate on the crate beside him. He didn't look at it. She ate her own meal at the kitchen table and read the same paragraph of her almanac 4 times without retaining anything, and listened to the fire pop. When she came back through, the plate was still full. She picked it up, scraped it into the scrap bucket. "Suit yourself," she said, not meanly. He said nothing. She went to bed. The back room. Lay on top of the quilt with her boots still on because she couldn't quite summon the energy to take them off. Stared at the ceiling. Listened to the wind come up around the eaves. She was not certain she'd made the right decision today. She was also not certain she'd made the wrong one. What she was certain of, that she'd seen 2 fists curl on a chair arm when the laughter came, and that fists meant fight. And fight meant there was something in there still worth reaching. Which was more than she could say for some of the men who'd shown up whole and standing on that platform today. Around midnight she heard him cough, once, then quiet. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. At least he was still alive. That was a start. She was up before dawn. Fire first. Always fire first in October. Then water for coffee. Then the mental list that started every morning and had gotten significantly longer since Harold since. When she came in from the woodpile with an armload of split oak, Beckett Crane was sitting up on the cot, arms crossed, watching her. "You snore," he said. "Good morning to you too," she said. She built the fire up and set the coffee pot on, poured a cup when it was ready and set it on the crate beside him without asking. He looked at it. Then he picked it up and drank. She sat down at the table with her own cup and her almanac and the list she'd been keeping in the margins. "I need to know what you can do," she said. "Not much. I didn't ask for editorializing, I asked for information." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. Those gray eyes, still sharp, still that particular shade of furious, though it had shifted slightly overnight, less explosive, more like something banked. Waiting. "I can use my hands," he said. "My arms. My eyes still work the way they should. I can sharpen a blade, repair tack, shoot if you prop me at the right angle." A pause. "That's the useful list. The longer list is everything I can't do, which I imagine is what you're really asking about." "I'm really asking about the useful list. I just gave it to you." "Then it's a start." She set her cup down. "Can you think?" He stared at her. "Can you plan? Can you read land? Can you look at a problem from 17 different angles and tell me which one I'm missing?" Still staring. "Because here's the situation." She folded her hands on the table. "I have run this ranch alongside my husband for 11 years. I know what needs doing. I know how to do most of it. But Harold ran the strategy of it, the decisions, the planning, the when and how and in what order." She paused. "Harold is gone, and I am very good at working, but I am starting to suspect I am not as good at the part that happens before the working." A long silence. "You're serious," he said. Completely. He looked down at his hands, at the calluses there, the old scars, the particular architecture of hands that had spent decades doing very specific things in very specific ways. I know land, he said slowly. I know weather. I know how to read terrain and how to make things last when you've got less than you need. He paused. I know where people come from when they don't want to be seen coming. That last one, Nora said. Why did you say that? He looked up. Something shifted in his expression. You've got trouble coming. Excuse me. This place. He nodded toward the door, the window, the world outside. The water. This creek bed, it's dry now, but come spring it runs, and this land sits right above the runoff channel for the whole north end of the valley. He said it matter-of-factly, the way he'd probably said 100 things about 100 pieces of terrain over 20 years in the mountains. Someone wants this land. Maybe already. You said your husband died 5 months ago. Yes. And nobody's come sniffing around. Nora set her cup down very carefully. I didn't say that, she said. She built the ramp that morning. It took until noon. She was not a carpenter. Harold had always said she had the spatial reasoning of a particularly optimistic goat, which she had objected to at the time and was beginning to suspect was slightly accurate. The first attempt was too steep. The second had a gap in the middle that would catch a wheel. The third worked more or less in the way that things you build yourself always work imperfectly, stubbornly good enough. She tested it with the chair, rolled it up, rolled it down. The left side flexed more than she'd like, but it held. Try it, she said. Breckett looked at the ramp from the doorway, the particular look of a man evaluating something he doesn't fully trust. Go on, she said. I can see the gap on the left side. The gap's not structural, it's cosmetic. Those words don't mean the same thing. In this case, they do. Go on. He gripped the wheels, pushed. The chair rolled forward to the edge of the ramp and stopped. Harder, Nora said. You're being careful. That's different. Stop being careful. He looked at her. Gray eyes. That specific fury. Then he shoved the wheels forward, and the chair lurched onto the ramp with a sound like a minor argument, and wobbled. The left side flexed exactly as she'd warned, and for 1 second it leaned toward tipping, and he corrected. Fast. Instinctive. Like a man who'd spent years adjusting for bad terrain and still knew how to do it, even if the terrain was now himself. He made it to the top, sat there, arms shaking from the effort, chest moving. He didn't say anything, just looked out at the yard, the scrubby grass, the listing barn, the fence line going crooked in 3 directions, the sky, that enormous October sky that just keeps going until it becomes something else, and his face did something she couldn't quite catalog. All right, she said after a while. Now you can get in and out on your own. He still didn't answer. She left him there and went to start on the tack pile, and she did not look back once because some things need to happen without an audience. The work started small. It always does. Yoke of old bridles with cracked buckles. 2 saddles that needed stitching. A length of rein that had split at the splice point and been wrapped in wire as a temporary fix approximately 2 years ago and never properly addressed. She dumped it beside his chair without ceremony. Fix what you can't, she said. Tell me what you can't. I'm not a seamstress. Nobody said you were. You're a man who knows how things work. Figure it out. She left for the north fence line. When she came back 3 hours later, both bridles were done. The stitching was rough honest, clearly not a seamstress, but it held. He was halfway through the first saddle. She looked at the work. It's ugly, he said before she could speak. It works, she said. Those aren't the same. On a working ranch they are. Ugly and functional beats, beautiful and broken every time. Something moved in his jaw. Not quite a smile, but the muscles involved in smiling making a decision about whether to go through with it. The split on the second saddle goes deeper than it looks, he said. You'll need new leather for that section, not just stitching. How much? He told her. She added it to her list. The next day, a box of knives. Dull to the point of uselessness. The day after the axe handle Harold had cracked and never replaced. Every time she brought him something, he said something skeptical. Every time she walked away and let him work. And every time she came back, the work was done rough, undecorated, completely functional. On the 4th day, she came back from the eastern pasture to find him outside, rolling himself across the yard in slow, deliberate circles, wheels crunching on gravel, face forward, jaw set. What are you doing? She asked. Building strength. For what? He stopped rolling, looked at her. For when you need me to be strong, he said. That 4th night, they ate at the same time for the first time. Not together exactly. She at the table, him at the crate he'd started using as a work surface, but in the same room, with the fire between them and the same pot of stew on the table. He didn't leave his plate untouched this time. After dinner, she sat by the fire and worked on a shirt with a split seam. He had a piece of scrap wood and a knife and was turning it into something she couldn't yet identify. "Why did you do it?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Do what?" "Take me. At the auction. You could have waited for someone useful." "I did wait for someone useful. I can't walk." "Neither can a fence post," she said, "but it still keeps the cattle in." A beat, a long one, and then a sound she hadn't heard from him yet. Short and rough and completely surprised. A laugh. A real one. Not the bitter exhale she'd been hearing when he said things about himself. An actual laugh. "You just compared me to a fence post," he said. "The comparison holds. It absolutely does not. Useful sturdy doesn't complain much." She kept her eyes on her mending. 2 out of 3 so far. He shook his head, but he was smiling. Just barely. Just enough. The fire crackled between them. She mended. He whittled. The wind went around the eaves and nobody said anything, and it was the best evening she'd had in 5 months, and she did not say so because saying it would have made it smaller somehow. 2 weeks in, Tuesday afternoon. 3 riders coming up the road. Nora heard the hooves before she saw them, stepped out of the barn, shaded her eyes. The man in front rode like someone who'd never been told no and found the concept theoretically interesting at best. Broad-shouldered, clean-shaved, dressed for business in the particular way that means someone else does the actual work. His horse was groomed to a shine that had no business existing on a working ranch road. Wallace Dent, 58 years old, owned 11,000 acres in the valley and had opinions about owning the rest. "Mrs. Calloway," he called, tipping his hat as he reined in. "Good to see you managing out here." The word managing had a specific weight to it. She'd noticed that before. How some men used the word managing for a woman's hard work the way you'd use the word trying for a child's drawing. "Mr. Dent." She didn't smile. "This is unexpected." He dismounted. His 2 men stayed on horseback. One of them had a rifle across his saddle, not raised just there the way a reminder gets left somewhere visible. He walked the yard with his eyes. Counted things she'd rather he didn't count. "I'll be direct," he said, turning back to her with the kind of smile that means I've already decided how this ends. "This land is too much for one woman. I'd like to make you an offer. Fair price. Enough to set you up somewhere easier." "I'm not selling." "You haven't heard the number." "Doesn't matter." His smile thinned by a fraction. "Winter's coming. You're sitting on a ranch you can barely operate with cattle you can't fully protect, and—" His gaze traveled over her shoulder to the porch where Breck had appeared in his chair with his hands on his wheels and his face doing nothing at all. "Whatever arrangement you've made there, which I'll be honest, Mrs. Calloway doesn't inspire confidence." "His name is Breckett Crane," she said. Something moved behind Dent's eyes at that. "There. Gone." "I know who he is," Dent said. "I also know what he is now, and that chair isn't going to protect this ranch when the hard weather comes. I think Nora said that you should leave." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man recalibrating. "I'll come back in the spring," he said. Not a threat exactly, the way you'd say something that's simply true. "And when I do, the offer will be different." He mounted his horse. His men turned with him. They rode off down the road and the dust settled, and Nora stood there with her hands loose at her sides and something tightening in her chest that wasn't quite fear. It was something older than fear, something that lives right below fear and does the real damage. She turned. Breck was at the top of the ramp. Had been there she didn't know how long. Long enough. The Sharp's rifle she had seen him cleaning last week was across his lap. "How long were you there?" she asked. "Long enough." She walked up the ramp and sat down on the steps beside him. Her legs felt wrong. Too much weight. Too long a day. "He's going to come back," she said. "Yes. And when he does, it won't be to make offers." "No." She looked at the road, the empty road, the dust already settling back into ordinary. "So what do we do?" Breck was quiet for a moment, his hands on the rifle, fingers moving slightly, not restless, thinking, the way some people think with their hands. "We get ready," he said. "For what?" He looked at her. Those gray eyes. The fury in them had shifted again, different from the auction, different from the first morning. This was focused fury, the kind with direction. "We make sure," he said, "that when he comes back he finds something different from what he's expecting." That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay in the back room and listened to the wind and the distant complaint of the cattle and the occasional creak of the chair in the main room. He was awake. She could hear him working on something. Metal against metal. Soft. Careful. The sound of a man who'd found a task and was taking it seriously. She let out a slow breath, and for the first time since Harold, since she did not feel entirely alone in the dark. On the 14th morning she found it on the kitchen table, a piece of canvas maybe 2 feet square, covered in charcoal lines, precise, detailed, the kind of lines drawn by someone who knows what they're doing and doesn't waste motion. The ranch, the creek bed, the ridge line to the north, the road in. 4 positions marked with small X's. In the corner, 3 words, "They will return." She stood there and looked at it for a long time. Then she put the coffee on and went to get him. Because here was the thing. Here was what she'd seen at that auction that nobody else had seen, or maybe nobody else had looked for. The man in that chair, the man the crowd had made into a punchline, had sat there in the middle of all that cruelty, and his hands had curled into fists. Not defeat, not surrender. Resistance. And you don't curl your hands into fists unless some part of you still intends to use them. She'd bet the ranch on that. Literally. She'd spent the last $14 she had on it. And looking at the map on her kitchen table, at the careful marks, the thought-through angles, the work of a mind that had been lying fallow for 3 years and was now remembering what it was built for, she thought. She might not have been wrong. And for the first time since the auction, since the wagon ride, since the first night, she'd listened for the sound of him breathing in the dark to make sure he was still alive. For the first time, she let herself believe it. He started before dawn, every morning. Before the coffee, before the light, before Nora's boots hit the floor in the back room. She knew because she heard him, the specific sound of wheels on packed dirt, going around the yard in the dark, slow at first, then a little faster. Then, and this was the part she'd started waiting for without admitting she was waiting for it, the sound would stop for a moment, a pause, and then start again. Because he'd decided to do one more round, always one more. She never mentioned it. He never mentioned it. They had developed without discussion a very efficient system of pretending not to notice things about each other that were actually quite important. It was, she thought, one of the more functional arrangements she'd had with another person. The knife work came first. She'd given him a box of blades too dull to be dangerous and watched him spend 3 days turning them into something that could split a hair. His hands moved with the particular economy of someone who had done a thing so many times it lived in the body now, not in the brain, in the hands themselves. Then the gun mount. She came out one afternoon to find him surrounded by pieces of the old iron plow she'd been meaning to haul off for 2 years. Measuring. Cutting with the hacksaw she didn't know he'd found. Filing edges with a focus that made the air around him feel somehow sharper. She stopped at a safe distance. What is that going to be? A mount. For what? The rifle. She looked at the pieces. Looked at the chair. Back at the pieces. You're going to attach a rifle to your chair. Yes. That's either very smart or very alarming. Probably both, he said, without looking up. Hand me the smaller file. She handed it to him. And then, because apparently this was her life now, she sat on the porch steps and watched Beckett Crane build himself a weapon platform out of a broken plow and sheer stubbornness. It took 3 days. He cursed through most of them. Quietly. Comprehensively. With the focused creativity of a man who'd spent years alone in mountains where there was nobody to hear him and had developed an extensive vocabulary accordingly. When it was finished, it was ugly. Iron brackets welded to the chair arms with a pivot joint that let the rifle swing left and right. Leather padding on the brace, a release lever he could work with his thumb. Ugly, solid, entirely functional. 2 out of 3, she thought, and didn't say. Bottles, he said. What? Set up bottles on the fence post, 50 yards. She set up 5. He loaded the sharps, locked it into the mount, settled his shoulder against the brace with the careful precision of a man relearning something he used to know differently. The first shot cracked across the yard like a dropped plank. The first bottle exploded. The second, the third, the fourth. 4 shots, 4 bottles, gone. Nora stared at the fence post, then at him, then at the fence post again. You missed one, she said. He was already reloading. That one's for you, he said. I don't need to. Yes, you do. He locked the rifle back. Come here. She walked over. He held the rifle out, not in the mount. Loose, for her to take. I know how to shoot, she said. Show me. She took the rifle, settled it the way her father had taught her 20 years ago. Aimed. Fired. The fence post next to the bottle splintered. Breck said. Shut up. She aimed again, adjusted 2 degrees right, fired. The bottle shattered. Better, he said, now faster. They spent the rest of the afternoon shooting until Nora's shoulder ached in a way that was going to make itself known for several days, and her ears had that particular ringing that means you've been doing the same loud thing too many times. By the time the light started going, she could hit 4 out of 5 at 50 yards. You'll do, Breck said. Is that the highest praise you're capable of? Today, yes. She handed the rifle back. He locked it into the mount and ran his hand along the metal the way you'd check something you'd built and weren't quite done worrying about. This might actually work, he said quietly. To himself mostly. The mount? All of it. A pause. Maybe. She looked at him. At the chair with its iron additions and its leather padding and its particular combination of desperation and ingenuity. At the man in it. I don't make promises anymore, she said. He looked up. Those gray eyes. Neither do I, he said. Something moved between them. The kind of thing that doesn't have a name yet. The kind that shows up before the words for it do. She looked away first. He went back to checking the mount, and the evening settled around them like it had decided to stay, and neither of them did anything to make it leave. Trouble arrived on a Wednesday, which in Nora's experience was exactly when trouble preferred to arrive. Not the dramatic days, not the days you've braced for. The ordinary ones. The ones where you're thinking about fence repairs, and the state of the hay supply, and whether the gray mare's left foreleg looks off, or whether you're imagining it. She was in the barn mucking out stalls when she heard them. The particular sound of horses on the road, too many for a casual visit, too deliberate for coincidence. She set down the rake, stepped into the yard, 3 riders. But different from Dent's last visit. These men weren't dressed for business. They were dressed for something else. Something that didn't need a name because you recognized it in the way they rode. Loose in the saddle. Not in a hurry. The dangerous kind of not in a hurry. Dent's men, not Dent. They stopped at the edge of the property line. The one in front looked at the house, the barn, the fence line, the way you look at something you're being paid to assess. Then he looked at Nora. Ma'am, he said, with exactly the politeness that isn't politeness at all. You're on my property, she said, just passing through. The road's back that way. He smiled, touched his hat brim, and they turned around and rode back the way they'd come. Slowly, no hurry, looking the whole time. Nora stood there until the dust settled. Then she walked back to the house and found Breck already on the porch. I know, he said. They weren't here for trouble. Not today. Then what? Information. His eyes were on the road, the empty road. They came to look. How many people? Where things are? What angles give cover? His jaw tightened. They'll come back with a report. And then, he didn't answer right away. His hands were on the rifle, not gripping, just resting. The way hands rest on something familiar when the mind is working somewhere else. And then, he said, we find out what Dent actually wants to do about this. That night, Breck set 3 tin cans on twine across the north approach, low to the ground, not visible in the dark. He did it without explaining. Nora watched and didn't ask, because she was beginning to understand the way he worked. The explanations came after, if they came at all. First came the doing. First came the hands moving through the task with that economy of motion. Then later, if she was patient enough, he'd tell her what he'd been thinking. She was learning to be patient, which was, her sister would have told her, genuinely remarkable. The letter arrived 4 days later, brought by a boy from town, folded, sealed with a plain wax stamp. Nora opened it at the kitchen table, read it twice, set it down, sat there for a moment. Breck was working at his bench by the window. He didn't ask. She picked the letter up and read it once more. Then she said Harold owed Wallace Dent money. The filing sound stopped. Not a little money, she said. A significant amount. There's a document, signed, notarized. She set the letter down flat on the table. 11 months before Harold died, he signed a promissory agreement. If the debt wasn't settled, Dent had right of claim on the property. Silence. The debt, she said, was not settled. More silence. She looked at the letter, at Harold's name referenced in the formal language of a legal document. Harold, who had never mentioned the name Wallace Dent to her. Harold, who had handled the finances because she'd let him, and because that had seemed like a fair division of labor at the time, and because she had not known, had not thought to ask, had not— Stop. She stopped. How long ago did he sign it? Breck said. Not a question. He already knew. He'd been listening to everything. 6 months before he got sick, she said. 11 months before he died. She folded the letter carefully. The way you handle something you'd rather not touch. I didn't know, she said. I know you didn't. He never. I know. And the thing was, he did know. She could tell by the way he said it. Not comfort. Not the reflexive reassurance of someone trying to make her feel better. Just the flat acknowledgement of a man who understood what it meant to have a truth arrive late and wrong. She stood up, went to the window, looked out at the yard, the scrub grass, the fence that needed 3 posts replaced, the barn with its western shingles going soft, the land she'd worked for 11 years, the land she'd thought was hers. She felt Breck watching her. She swallowed once, straightened her shoulders by a fraction. All right, she said. What do we do about it? Deputy Orrin Falk arrived on a Thursday morning, 55 years old, badge worn dull. The expression of a man who'd spent too many years watching things go sideways and had mostly made his peace with it. He tied his horse at the post and walked to the porch with the deliberate step of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. Breck was in his chair at the top of the ramp with the sharps in the mount, not aimed, just there. Falk stopped at the base of the steps. Ma'am? He nodded at Nora, then at Breck. Crane. Falk, Breck said. The way men who've existed in the same territory for a long time say each other's names. Not warm, not cold, just a fact. I came to tell you something, Falk said to Nora. About that document. Tell me. He turned his hat in his hands. A man working up to something. It's real, he said. I checked. The notarization is valid. The witnesses were legitimate. Your husband signed it. He paused. I'm sorry. Nora said nothing. According to territorial law, Dent has grounds to pursue a claim. It would go to the circuit judge. And the circuit judge, he stopped. Started again. The circuit judge in this district has ruled in Dent's favor in every property dispute in the last 4 years. The words landed one at a time, like stones dropped in water, each one making a smaller splash than it should have. So what you're telling me, Nora said, is that the law isn't going to help me. I'm telling you that the law as it currently operates in this district is going to help him. Falk said nothing, which was the same as yes. Is there anything, if Dent were to act outside the law, directly, in a way that could be witnessed and documented? He glanced at Breck, back to Nora. That would be a different matter. So he has to make a mistake. He has to make a mistake in front of someone who can do something about it. And until then, I'd advise you to be careful. He rode off. Nora stood on the porch and watched him go. He's not wrong, Breck said. No, she said. He's not. She turned, looked at the yard, the mountains beyond it, the enormous, indifferent sky. He's also not very useful. No, Breck said. He's not. A pause. But he came, Breck said. He didn't have to. He came anyway. She looked at him. Some people show up even when there's nothing they can do, he said. That's not nothing. She thought about that for the rest of the day while she fixed the fence line and checked the cattle and hauled water and did every other thing that needed doing, and by the time she sat down for dinner, she still hadn't decided if he was right. The question came that night, unexpected, the way the important ones always are. They were on the porch again, after dinner. The fire inside throwing orange light through the window, the night air cold enough to see your breath but not cold enough yet to drive you in. She'd been watching the ridge line. The habit of watching the ridge line had become a thing she did now without deciding to do it. Like checking the weather, like counting the cattle. Another layer of vigilance that had quietly folded itself into the ordinary. What was the hardest part, she said. He was quiet. After the slide, the hardest part. She didn't explain why she was asking. She'd learned that he responded better to questions that didn't come with apologies for asking them. He looked out at the darkness. A long pause. Long enough that she thought he might not answer. The first month, he said finally. Not for the reason you'd think. Tell me. He stopped. I kept waking up and thinking I could feel my legs. His voice was flat, careful. The voice of someone choosing each word with full awareness that words can crack things open if you're not precise about them. And for about 10 seconds every morning, it was fine. I was just a man waking up, like normal. He stopped again. And then I'd remember, he said, and every morning it was like the first time. The mountain wind moved through the scrub. Far off something called once and went quiet. When did it stop? She asked. About 6 months in. The 10 seconds went to 5, then 2. Then I'd open my eyes and I already knew. He turned the wheels of his chair slightly. Back, forth, a small motion. That was almost worse in a way. The knowing before you even wake up all the way. Nora looked at her hands. Harold used to say good morning to me, she said. Every single day, first thing. Didn't matter what mood he was in or what the day looked like or whether we'd argued the night before. She paused. I didn't realize how much I'd organized around that sound until it wasn't there anymore. Yeah, Breck said. Just that. Yeah. But he said it like he understood the specific geography of the thing she was describing. The way a landmark disappearing changes the whole map. She looked at him. Can I ask you something? She said. You generally ask whether you can ask, and then ask regardless. That's not inaccurate. What do you miss most? He thought about it seriously. She appreciated that. He didn't rush to the easy answer. The going, he said. What do you mean? Just going somewhere. Deciding I wanted to be in a different place and going there, under my own. He stopped. The mountains. I could be anywhere in those mountains in a day's travel. I knew every route, every approach. His hands stilled on the wheels. I keep thinking in routes that don't work anymore. You're still thinking in routes, she said. They just look different now. He looked at her. The map you drew me, she said. The firing positions, the approach angles, that's still the same mind. It's just applied differently. He held her gaze for a moment. You're very annoying, he said, when you're right. I've been told. And then she asked the question she'd been not asking for 2 weeks. What do you miss most about the man you were before? Silence. Real silence. The kind that means she'd hit something true. The certainty, he said finally, that I could handle whatever came at me. He looked at his hands, at the calluses and the scars and the specific evidence of a life that had been enormous and was now contained in a chair. I wasn't a modest man. I knew what I was capable of and I trusted it completely. A pause. And now I wake up every day and I don't know. I don't know what this... He gestured at himself, at the chair, at all of it. Can do. I find out as I go. That sounds terrifying, she said. It is. It also sounds, she said carefully, like what everyone feels, all the time. And most of us just don't admit it. He looked at her for a long time. You always this stubborn, he said. Only when someone needs me to be. He almost smiled. Almost. And then she asked the last question. The real one. The one underneath the others. What scares you most, right now, about all of this? The chair turned slightly, stopped. Letting you down, he said, when it matters. She didn't say anything. I can plan, he said. I can see what's coming. I can put a bullet exactly where it needs to go at 50 yards from a chair in the dark. His voice was level, factual, but underneath it something that cost him. But when the moment comes, when they're actually here and it's actually happening, I don't know if this, the chair again, the gesture, is going to be enough. She let that sit. Neither do I, she said finally. He looked at her. But here's what I know, she said. I've been running this place on doubt for 5 months. I know how to work with not knowing, and so far, she looked out at the yard, the ranch, the dark mountains behind it. So far, we're still here. He held her gaze, and didn't say anything. But the thing that had been in his eyes since the auction, that particular focused fury, shifted. Just slightly. Added a layer it hadn't had before. She went inside. He stayed on the porch, and she fell asleep faster than she had in months. The tin cans went off at 2 in the morning. Not loud. That was the thing. Not a crash or a bang, just the quiet tinkling of a can being bumped by something moving through the dark. Small sound. Careful sound. The kind of sound made by people trying not to make sound. Nora was on her feet before she was fully awake. Boots, shotgun, through the main room. Breck was already on the porch, rifle locked and loaded in the mount. Face in the moonlight, hard-focused, completely unsurprised. How many, she breathed? At least 4, maybe 5. His eyes moved across the dark yard with the particular attention of a man who'd spent 20 years tracking things in low light. North and east, they split up. She could hear them now. Not movement exactly. The absence of sound in places where there should be ambient sound. The cattle had gone quiet. The nightbirds. Everything had pulled back from something it didn't want to be near. The barn, Breck said. She looked and saw it. the faint orange flicker at the base of the barn's western wall. Growing. No, she moved. He caught her arm. Don't run at it, he said, low, hard. That's what they want, you in the open. They're burning. I know what they're doing. Stay on the porch. A shot cracked from the darkness. High, wide, warning, or practice. Breck swung the rifle mount left, tracked, waited 2 seconds, 3, and fired. The crack was enormous in the still night. From somewhere in the darkness, a sound. Not words, just sound. One, he said, flat, already reloading. Nora raised the shotgun, fired toward the eastern shadow movement she'd tracked. The blast lit up the yard for a fraction of a second, long enough to see a shape diving for the ground behind the water trough. She reloaded, fired again lower. The shape didn't get up. 2, Breck said. Movement from the north. Fast. 2 shapes running toward the barn with something in their hands. Nora swung the shotgun. Breck swung the mount. He fired first, one of the shapes went down. The second one reached the barn wall and there was a sound, and then the fire jumped. No, Nora said. The house, Breck said. Protect the house. The barn is... I know. She knew. I know what the barn is. She knew exactly what the barn was. 8 months of her sweat and Harold's half-finished plans and the last good memories of a man she'd been married to for 11 years and had complicated feelings about and loved anyway, in the way you love something that is part of your life before you know what loving means. She knew. She turned toward the house. 2 more shots from Breck's position. Methodical. The sound of a man who is not panicking, who is working. Then from the road hooves, retreating, fast. Then nothing. Then the sound of the barn burning. Nora stood at the edge of the yard and watched it go. The west wall first. Then the roof. The old hay bales catching and taking everything with them. The particular terrible efficiency of fire when it has been given enough material to work with and no reason to be slow about it. She'd grabbed 2 buckets and thrown them before Breck caught her arm again. Let it go, he said. I can... You can't. And if you try, you'll just get yourself killed. The structure is already gone. She looked at him. His face was not easy. Not fine, but steady. The face of someone who had made a calculation and was living with the result of it. She looked back at the barn, watched the roof go. And something broke open in her chest in a very specific way. Not grief exactly, not rage exactly. The particular feeling of watching something you cannot fix become something you have to accept. She didn't cry. She would have been surprised at herself if she had. She just watched. They'll come back, she said. Yes, more of them this time. Yes. She turned to face him. The firelight on both of them. The smell of smoke and scorched wood settling over the yard like a blanket. Tell me we have a plan, she said. We have the beginning of one. That's not the same as a plan. No, he said, but it's what we've got. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded and went back inside to start figuring out what they had left to work with. The next morning Falk came back. He rode up slowly, looked at the ruins of the barn for a long time without speaking. Then he looked at Nora. Anyone hurt? No. He nodded, got down from his horse, walked around the perimeter of the damage with the expression of a man committing something to memory. I found 2 of Dent's men last night, he said, at the doctor's in town. Did they say anything? They said they were doing some night riding and had an accident. Of course they did. Of course. He came back to stand in front of her. I can't arrest them. I can't prove Dent ordered this. I don't have a witness who'll talk, and I don't have documentation, and the circuit judge... I know, Nora said. You told me. He looked at Breck. Breck looked back. There is one thing, Falk said slowly. If Dent himself comes, if he shows up on your property, if he gives an order directly, in front of me. He paused. That's different. I can act on that. I can arrest on that. So he has to come himself, Breck said. He has to come himself. And until then, Falk put his hat back on. You're on your own. He mounted his horse, and then he stopped, turned. For what it's worth, he said to Nora. I'm sorry about the barn, about... He gestured. At all of it. At the ranch and the ruin and the weight of the things she was carrying. About all of it. She looked at him. Come back when you can actually help, she said. Not unkindly. He rode off. They worked like the world was ending, because in a specific and limited way it was. Nora spent 2 days clearing every piece of brush and scrub that could give cover to a man approaching from the north or east. Her hands blistered by noon on the first day. By the end of the second they were bleeding in 2 places, and she wrapped them in strips cut from an old shirt and kept going. Breck directed. rolling from spot to spot in the yard, pointing out angles she'd missed, explaining in the patient, relentless tone of a man who has calculated trajectories in his head for 20 years and finds other people's failure to do so mildly baffling. Why a bush that seemed too small to matter actually provided significant concealment at the angle of approach from the road. "That one," he said. "That's barely a bush. Cut it anyway." She cut it. He reinforced the chair. Again. She watched him bolt iron strips to the frame in ways that made the whole thing heavier and more complex and more purposeful. He added a second brake lever, one for each hand, a detachable rifle mount so he could move the weapon to different positions, a storage bracket on the right side for ammunition. "You're building a weapon," she said. "I'm building a tool. That's what people say about weapons. Hand me the smaller wrench." She handed it to him. 3 days in, she came out at dusk to find him testing the new brake system, locking himself in place, releasing, locking. The mechanical repetition of a man who refuses to leave anything to chance. "Breck," she said. He kept testing. "Breck." He stopped. She sat down on the porch steps, elbows on knees. The particular posture of someone who's been working too hard and is allowing themselves 2 minutes of not working. "If they come with 20 men," she said, "they'll have more than 20. If they come with... We can't fight numbers with numbers. We don't have numbers." He set the wrench down. "We fight numbers with position, with preparation, with knowing exactly what's coming and from which direction before they know we know." He looked at her. "And we make sure Dent comes himself, because that's the only play that ends this, rather than just extending it." "How do we make sure he comes himself?" "By making nothing go the way he planned, by costing him enough men and enough time that he has to stop sending people and start coming himself." He held her gaze. "He thinks you're a woman alone on a failing ranch with a cripple for company. He's going to send men because sending men is cheaper than coming himself. Until it isn't." "Until it isn't." She turned that over. "That means we have to survive the men first," she said. "Yes. However many he sends." "Yes." She looked at the yard, the cleared sight lines, the positions he'd marked, the strange improvised fortress their home had become. "All right," she said, and went back to work. The news came on the coldest morning yet. Falk. Again. Earlier than expected. Riding harder than his usual. He got down from his horse and he didn't bother with pleasantries this time, which told her everything before he said a word. "The circuit judge," he said. "Dent got to him. Faster than I expected." He looked at his hat. Not her. "The claim on your property has been filed, formally, which means Dent doesn't have to send men anymore to scare you off." He paused. "He's going to come himself, with enough people to make it final." Nora said nothing. "How many?" Breck said. "Word I'm getting is 25, maybe more. He's pulling from 3 counties. "When?" "End of the month, maybe sooner." Falk looked at Nora. "I want you to hear me," he said. "I know you've decided to stay. I know that I can't change that. But I need you to understand what 25 armed men means in practical terms, even with..." He gestured at Breck. "At the chair. At the iron additions. Even with everything you've done here. The numbers don't..." "I know what the numbers mean," Nora said. "Then you know." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "And I'm still here." Falk closed his mouth, opened it, closed it again. "There's something else," he said. "Something I probably shouldn't tell you, and I'm going to tell you anyway." Breck looked at him. "There's a man," Falk said carefully. "One of Dent's regulars, name of Tanner Briggs." He watched Breck when he said it. Watched carefully. Breck went very still. Not the stillness of surprise. The stillness of something confirmed. "You know that name," Falk said. "Yes," Breck said. "He was with you," Falk said. "On the mountain, 3 years ago." "He was my guide," Breck said. "He knew the terrain I wanted to work. I paid him to take me up a specific approach. The approach that went through the slide zone. The approach, he told me, was stable." Something in Breck's voice. Not anger. Colder than anger. The tone of someone who has been carrying a question for 3 years and is watching the answer arrive. "I always thought I assumed he'd made an error. A judgment call about conditions that turned out to be wrong." "He didn't make an error," Falk said. The silence after that was enormous. "Dent wanted that section of the mountain," Falk said quietly. "The trapping rights, the access routes. You were the only independent operator working it regularly, the only one whose removal would clear the way." He stopped. I can't prove this. I want you to know I can't prove this. But I've been hearing things for 3 years and I believe it." Breck said nothing, his hands on the chair arms, not fists this time, flat, open, very still. 3 years, he said, finally. "I'm sorry," Falk said, and meant it. 3 years I thought it was the mountain." His voice was nothing recognizable, emptied of tone. 3 years I thought I'd just misjudged, been careless, that it was my fault. "I know." "Tanner Briggs," he said, just the name, like something being set down. "He's been working for Dent since, running errands, the kind of errands people don't talk about." Falk paused. "He's going to be part of whatever Dent brings to your door." Breck looked at the mountains, the distant line of the Rockies going blue at this hour, the mountains that had taken everything he had, except they hadn't. A man had taken it, and the man was going to walk through that gate at the end of the month. "All right," Breck said, the voice back, steady now, deliberately steady. "Thank you for telling me." Falk nodded, mounted, looked at them both one last time. "I'll come when I can," he said. "I don't know what that means yet, but I'll come." He rode off. Nora stood next to Breck's chair and didn't say anything for a while. The mountains were very clear today, the way they get before weather. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Don't be." He was still looking at the mountains. "It changes things, but it doesn't change what we have to do." "Does it change how you feel about—" "Yes," he said, "but that's for later." He turned the chair, looked at her directly. "Right now I need to think about angles." She nodded, and went inside to put more coffee on, because that's what you do when the person next to you needs to think. You get out of the way, and you keep them supplied with the basics, and you trust that they know what they're doing. She'd learned that, specifically, in the last 3 weeks. That trust wasn't a feeling. Trust was a decision you made and then acted on, every day, even when you weren't sure. Especially when you weren't sure. She poured 2 cups, went back out, set one beside him without asking. He picked it up, and they sat in the cold, clear morning and looked at the mountains and thought about what was coming. Together. The days before a storm have a specific quality. Not the storm itself, not the aftermath. The days before. When the air gets too clear and too cold and everything goes very quiet in the way that living things go quiet when they know something is coming and can't do anything about it. But wait. Nora had grown up reading weather. 20 years of mornings looking at sky and deciding what the day was going to be. She knew the quality of waiting air. This was it. And it had nothing to do with weather. They worked like the days were numbered, because they were. Breck had the map spread across the kitchen table every morning before she finished making coffee. Not the charcoal canvas from the beginning. A new one, more detailed. 4 weeks of observation and calculation condensed into lines and marks and small notations that meant specific things to a specific kind of mind. His mind, which she had come to trust the way you trust a thing that has proven itself. Not blindly, not easily. With the particular confidence that comes from watching something work repeatedly under real conditions. "Here," he said one morning, his finger on the road approach. "Main column comes straight. That's how Dent thinks. He's not a tactician. He's a man who owns things. He wants to be seen arriving." The finger moved east. "Flanking pair from the ridge, maybe 2 pairs. But the column is the statement. And we use that. We use that." He sat back. "We let him come. We let him stop. We let him make his speech." A pause. "And then nothing goes the way he planned." She poured his coffee, set it down, sat across from him. "Tell me the failure points," she said. He looked up. "You said once that the more detailed a plan gets, the more clearly you can see where it breaks," she said. "So tell me where this one breaks." He looked at her for a moment. Then he told her. All of it. Every place the plan could crack. Every assumption that might be wrong. Every moment where the math required something to happen that wasn't guaranteed to happen. She listened to all of it. "Okay," she said when he finished. "Okay. We can't fix most of those, so we acknowledge them and we move." She picked up her coffee. "The ones we can fix, tell me those." And they spent the rest of the morning fixing what could be fixed. The preparations were not glamorous, which was, Nora thought, how most important things worked. The glamorous version existed in the telling afterward. The actual version involved blisters and frustration and the specific misery of hauling heavy things across frozen ground before sunrise. She cleared brush for 2 days straight. Every piece of cover within 50 yards of the house that a man could hide behind. Breck directed from the yard, rolling to each position, checking angles, pointing out places she'd judged acceptable that he judged insufficient. That one. I got it. The roots, go lower. I went to the roots. The roots extend another foot east. She looked at the stump, looked at him. You're doing this on purpose, she said. I'm doing this because a man can lie flat behind that root system and have a clear shot at the porch. She picked up the axe. He was right. He was always right about the angles. It was becoming somewhat irritating. Thank you, he said when she finished. I need a new pair of hands, she said. Mine have opinions now. Blisters. Opinions. He almost smiled, the corner of his mouth, just that. She went back to the woodpile. At night she couldn't sleep and didn't try very hard. She lay on the cot in the main room. She'd stopped using the back bedroom, though neither of them had discussed why, and listened to Breck work at the bench by the window. Metal against metal, the quiet, focused sound of a man solving problems with his hands. Sometimes she watched him. He didn't know. Or maybe he did and chose not to mention it. Either was possible with Breck. His hands moved through the work with a precision that was almost musical. Pick up the piece, assess it, file, measure, file again, set it down and pick up the next one. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The body knowing its job and doing it without requiring the mind to micromanage every step. She'd spent 11 years watching Harold work. Harold worked with enthusiasm and improvisation and a fundamental optimism about the outcome that was sometimes right and more often not. She'd loved him for it. This was different. This was the work of someone who had done hard things in hard places for a long time and understood that the difference between surviving and not surviving was usually the quality of your preparation. She fell asleep watching his hands. It was, she would think later, one of the better ways she'd ever fallen asleep. Falk came back 4 days before. Not with news exactly, more like confirmation. Word from town that Dent had been pulling men in for a week. Paying well. The kind of paying that meant he expected resistance and wanted to outnumber it by enough margin that it wouldn't matter. 23 riders confirmed, possibly more. Falk stood in the yard with his hat in his hands and told them this with the expression of a man delivering a sentence he hasn't been able to find a way around. I filed something, he said, at the end. Almost like an afterthought. Except not. Breck looked at him. The night your barn burned, Falk said. That's when I filed it, 6 weeks ago. I've been building a file on Dent for 4 years, and that night finally gave me enough. He stopped. I didn't tell you because I didn't know if they'd come. And I didn't want to give you something to count on that might not arrive. Silence. They might come, Falk said. I genuinely don't know. The request went up the chain and I haven't heard back, and that's either good or bad, and I can't tell which. Nora looked at Breck. Breck looked at Falk. Are you coming? Breck said. Yes, Falk said, without hesitation. Then we plan without the federal piece, Breck said, and if they show up, we adjust. Falk nodded, put his hat back on. Tell me where you want me, he said. The night before. Neither of them pretended to try to sleep. They sat on the porch in the cold. The temperature had dropped through the evening and was still dropping. Their breath came out in small clouds. The stars were extravagant, the kind of sky that only happens when the air is clean and cold and completely honest. The yard was transformed. Stacked barrels along the porch rail filled with dirt and sand, enough to stop a bullet from a rifle at 50 yards. The east corner platform rough lumber built at the specific height and angle that let Breck pivot the mount through the full eastern approach without repositioning. The west approach blocked with salvaged timber dragged into place over 3 days. The wires, the positions, the ammunition stockpiled in specific places at specific heights so hands could find it in the dark without looking. Their home, which was also now the best defended position within 20 miles. Can I ask you something? Nora said. You will regardless. That had become a thing between them, a small ritual. She asked if she could ask, and he reminded her that the asking was formality, and she asked anyway. What are you thinking about right now? He was quiet. Not strategy, she said, not angles. What are you actually thinking about? He turned the wheels slightly. The small motion she'd learned to read as him settling into something real. The mountains, he said. The morning after the slide, when I woke up and couldn't... He stopped. When I understood what had happened. He looked at the dark ridge line. I thought, this is it. This is the whole life now. This small. This limited. His voice was level, careful. I thought the world had gotten very small and was going to stay that way. She said nothing, just listened. And then you showed up, he said, and brought me to a place that was also small, 50 acres and a leaking barn and a fence that couldn't stay upright. He paused. And somehow that felt different. Why? Because you were choosing it, he said. You were choosing to make something out of it, not accepting smallness, building inside it. He looked at her. That was new. I hadn't seen that before. She looked at the mountains. Harold used to say I made things harder than they needed to be, she said. That I took on more than was necessary. That I had, she remembered the exact word, a complicated relationship with rest. Harold wasn't wrong about that. No, she said. He wasn't. She paused. But complicated relationships with rest build things that last, and I'd rather build something complicated than rest inside something ordinary. He held her gaze. Yes, he said simply. Just that. And then Nora. Whatever happens tomorrow. He said it carefully, like a man choosing each word with full awareness of its weight. I need you to know that this... He stopped, started again. That you were the thing I didn't know I was looking for. Before the mountain, during it, after. His hands on the chair arms, not fists. Open. I'd have been a very different person if I'd never been bought at that auction. She looked at him for a long moment. Worse or better, she said. Different, he said. Just different. And I'd never have known what I was missing. She reached over, took his hand. His fingers wrapped around hers with the instinct of something practiced. As if this was a thing they'd always done. As if the 3 months of not doing it had been the anomaly, and this was the return to normal. We're still here tomorrow, she said. That's what I'm planning for. You don't know that either. No, she said. But it's a better plan than the alternative. He squeezed her hand. They sat until the cold drove them inside. And neither of them mentioned that they sat close together on the cot until morning with the fire burning low and the rifles in reach and the whole complicated weight of tomorrow pressing on the roof. Some things don't need mentioning. They came with the sound of distant thunder that wasn't thunder. Hooves. The ground carrying the message up through the porch boards before the ears caught it fully. Low, continuous. Too many to count by sound alone. Nora stood at the porch rail and breathed. In, out, hands on the shotgun. Steady. She'd made them steady through 2 weeks of practice, and she was keeping them that way by sheer decision. Breck was at the east corner platform. Chair locked into position. The sharps in the mount. His posture the particular stillness of a man who has done a hard thing many times and knows that stillness is not the same as not being ready. Falk was at the east fence line, out of sight, listening. And then they came around the bend in the road. 23 riders. Wallace Dent in front. He looked different from the business visits. Same clothes, same composure, but something underneath it had changed. The patience was gone. The patience that had made his earlier visits feel like options being offered rather than threats being made. This was not an offer. He rode to the gate and stopped, and his men spread out behind him in the practiced way of men who'd done this kind of thing before for money and understood the geometry of intimidation. He looked at the house, the barricaded porch, the fortified yard, the iron gun mount at the corner platform with the man in the chair behind it. He looked at all of it, and he smiled, like it was a curiosity. Like the most it could be was interesting. Mrs. Calloway, he called, voice carrying easily in the cold air. I've been patient with you. I want you to know I recognize that patience costs something, and I've spent a great deal of it. He paused. It's gone now. Nora stepped to the edge of the porch. You're not welcome on my property, she said. Clear, no tremor. It's not your property, Dent said. Your husband signed it away. The court has confirmed it. This is a legal matter being carried out legally, and I'd encourage you to see it that way. Leave, she said. Mrs. Calloway. Leave. He sighed. The particular sigh of a man performing patience he no longer feels. Then he looked at the east corner platform, at Breck, and something moved in Dent's face. Recognition. And underneath that something else. Something she'd call satisfaction if she was being uncharitable, which she was. Crane, he said, addressing him directly, like Nora was no longer the relevant party. I know you can hear me. I want you to understand something. He kept his voice reasonable, conversational. What happened on the mountain was a business decision. You were occupying territory I needed. Tanner told me you'd gone down in the slide. I took him at his word. A pause. Apparently he was imprecise. Breck said nothing. Nora watched his hands on the chair arms, open, flat, still, I don't hold grudges, Dent said. I'd like you to take that on board, if you'd like to walk away from this well. He glanced at the chair. If you'd like to leave, the offer extends to you as well. Still nothing from Breck. Dent looked at the rifle mount, looked at the fortified porch, looked at all the evidence of what two people had built against him, and the smile went away. Burn it, he said, to his men, conversationally, like a man deciding what to order at dinner. All of it, the house, whatever's left of the barn. We'll let the court sort out the land after. His men started forward, and Breck fired, into the ground, 6 feet in front of Dent's horse. The crack was enormous. The horse shied hard. Dent grabbed the reins, and for 1 second, one suspended significant second, 23 men stopped moving, and the morning went completely silent. Come on to this property, Breck said, his voice carrying to the fence line where Falk was listening. And the next one goes higher. Dent steadied his horse, looked at the chair, at the man in it. Take him, he said, and then it was real. The east flankers moved first, 4 riders pushing through the scrub toward the fence line. Breck was already pivoting, the mount swinging smooth and precise through 40 degrees, and the first shot took the lead rider's horse down at the knees, the animal going hard and the rider tumbling into the frozen ground. The second rider hit the wire Breck had strung 3 nights ago, 6 inches off the ground, invisible in the scrub. The horse went down screaming, the rider over the top of it and into the dirt at speed. Nora was moving before she'd fully decided to move. East rail of the porch, shotgun up. The third flanking rider was trying to control a horse that had seen 2 horses go down and had opinions about continuing forward. She fired. The blast lit up the morning, and the rider dove sideways off the horse, and the horse bolted south and didn't stop. The main group hit the barricade, exactly as planned. The stacked timber on the west approach forcing them right, the barrels on the east forcing them left. The gap in the middle, the gap Breck had designed, the gap that looked like an oversight but was a deliberate funnel channeling them into the 30-yard kill zone directly in front of the porch. Breck was firing into it, not fast, deliberate, each shot with a pause behind it, the pause of a man who knows where the bullet is going before he pulls the trigger and takes the half-second to confirm it. Shot, pause, shot, pause. The methodical sound of it was almost worse than chaos would have been. Nora worked the near approaches. The shotgun's range was limited, but the porch was close quarters, and close quarters was where the shotgun lived. A man cleared the barrel stack on the east side, and she swung the stock and connected with his shoulder, and he went sideways into the barrel, and she stepped back and fired, and he did not get up. She reloaded, her hands steady, 'cause she'd made them steady. Torch, Breck said. She looked. 2 riders breaking from the chaos with something in their hands. Something burning, coming hard for the house from the north where the approach was clearest. Breck tracked the first one, fired. The rider went down 20 yards out and the torch fell into the dirt and sputtered. The second one got through. The torch arced through the cold air in a long orange curve and hit the south corner of the porch roof. Old shingles, dry from a summer without enough rain. They caught. No, Nora breathed. She moved for the blanket on the rail. The wet blanket she'd hung there exactly for this, and grabbed it and swung it over the flame before it could spread. The heat hit her face. She beat at it, smoke thick and hot in her eyes, coughing, still beating, still beating. Nora! Breck's voice, hard. Don't stop. She didn't stop. She beat at it until there was nothing left to beat at, and the smoke was all that remained, and her arms were shaking and her lungs were burning, and she turned back to the yard with the ruined blanket still in her hands and saw 3 men at the porch rail, coming over it. She dropped the blanket and grabbed the shotgun from the rail where she'd propped it and fired at the first man, and the second man grabbed her arm, and she let him grab it because she was already swinging the gun toward his head. The stock connected. He released her arm. She stepped back, fired again. The third man was over the rail and coming at her, and she had 1 shell left and she used it, and the porch went quiet. She reloaded, looked up. The yard. The yard was chaos. And also not chaos. Controlled chaos. The specific organized violence of a plan that was working roughly as planned, with the specific exceptions that any plan has when it meets reality. Breck's rifle was still firing. Shot, pause, shot. And the remaining riders were pulling back. She saw it. The moment it shifted. The moment the men who were still on horses started looking at each other instead of looking at the house. The moment the calculation changed. the moment they started doing the math of what this was costing versus what it was supposed to cost. One rider turned his horse, then a second, then 3 more. "Hold," Breck said, loud enough to carry to Falk's position. "Hold the line." Dent's voice cut through. You hold right now, get back." And then Tanner Briggs broke. She saw it. The gray horse at the back of the group spinning east, Tanner's heels going in hard. Running. "Marshal," Breck's voice, controlled, directed east, and Falk was already moving. 2 riders from the fence line cut Tanner off before he hit the scrub, brought him back hard. The gray horse fighting the riders flanking it, Tanner fighting the riders flanking him. And then from the south road, hooves, different rhythm, faster, more purposeful, and more of them than the flanking pair. 8 riders coming hard, and on the lead rider's coat catching the morning light a federal badge. The marshals moved through the yard like water finding level, efficient, unhurried, the particular confidence of authority that has paperwork behind it. Dent's remaining men gave up with varying degrees of grace. Some stopped immediately. Some required a moment to assess the new situation and conclude that the assessment came out the same way. Only 2 made any effort to resist, and that effort lasted approximately 4 seconds before it didn't. Nora stood on the porch with the shotgun hanging loose in her hands and watched it happen. Her ears were ringing. From the shooting, the particular high tone that comes from too much noise too close and doesn't go away for hours. Through the ringing she could hear the marshals, Dent, his men, the horses, the ordinary sounds of a morning that had just finished being extraordinary. The lead marshal was a broad man, weathered face, patient eyes. He rode straight to Dent and stopped. Wallace Dent. Flat, professional. "You're under arrest, land fraud, coercion, conspiracy to commit violence against persons and property." He reached into his coat. "And the list goes on. I'll read it to you formally somewhere quieter." Dent stared at him. "On whose?" "Federal," the marshal said, "which supersedes your local arrangements." A pause. "Including the judge," the marshal added, "who is also under investigation. Different matter, different day, but related." Dent stood very still, and Nora watched the specific moment when a man who has believed for decades that he is untouchable understands that he is not. It moved across his face like weather. Disbelief first, then calculation, the reflex of a man whose first response to any situation is to find the angle. Then the calculation failing to produce an angle. Then something underneath all of it. He looked defeated. And underneath that, something she hadn't expected to recognize. The face of a man who had spent 40 years trying to make sure nobody could ever take anything from him again, and had ended up here anyway, in handcuffs, on land he'd never actually owned. She didn't feel sorry for him, but she understood him, just enough, just for a second. And then it passed. As the marshals moved him toward his horse, Dent turned, not toward Nora, toward Breck, toward the chair at the east corner platform, toward the man who had just spent the last hour being precisely, methodically, unarguably enough. "You're still a man in a chair on someone else's land," Dent said, quietly, not vicious, almost wondering, like he was working something out. "Even now, even after all of this, that's still what you are." Breck looked at him. A long moment, the gray eyes, steady. That quality of attention that had been there since the auction block, probably since before the mountain, since always just aimed differently now. "You're right," Breck said. "I'm in a chair, on the land of the woman I chose to stand beside." He held Dent's gaze without effort. "And you're in handcuffs on land you spent 3 years trying to steal. So," he paused, "I don't think the chair is the most relevant fact here." Dent looked at him, and looked away, and was led to his horse. Tanner Briggs was brought to the porch. The 2 marshals who'd cut him off held his arms. He was looking at the ground, not in a shameful way, in the way of someone who has decided that not looking at anything is the safest policy. Breck rolled to the bottom of the ramp. "Look at me," he said. "Tanner didn't." "Tanner," slowly. Tanner Briggs looked up, and there it was. The specific discomfort of being looked at by the person you have wronged in a way that cannot be repaired. Not guilt exactly, something more fundamental. The discomfort of being truly seen by someone you'd hoped to never see again. Breck looked at him for a long time. Nora stood back. This was not hers. She understood that. 3 years, Breck said. Not loud, not angry in any way that showed. I spent 3 years thinking it was my fault, that I'd been careless, that I'd misjudged the mountain. He stopped. It was a lot to carry. Tanner said nothing. You're going to tell the marshals everything, Breck said. The route, what Dent paid you, what you told me about conditions that day, what you did after. He said it the way he stated plans, without room for negotiation. And then you're going to say it in court, and then you're going to sign it. Tanner's jaw worked. And if I don't, then I spend whatever time I have left making sure everyone in 4 states knows exactly what you are, Breck said. And the thing about a guide who sells his client to an avalanche for money is that his name doesn't recover from that. Not in this territory. Not anywhere in this territory. A pause. I know men who trap from here to the Wyoming line, Breck said. I know men who've been in these mountains for 30 years. Every one of them will know your name by spring if you don't cooperate. He looked at Tanner steadily. That's not a threat. That's an explanation of how things work. Tanner looked at him. I didn't know you'd survive, he said, finally, quietly. When Dent said I thought it would be quick, clean. I didn't think you'd... That's not an explanation, Breck said. That's just the part where you tell yourself it's less bad than it is. He held the man's gaze. You chose money over a man's life. Whatever you thought would happen afterward doesn't change what you chose. Tanner closed his mouth and nodded. Once, the marshals moved him away, and Breck sat at the bottom of the ramp for a moment. Just sat. Nora came and sat on the bottom porch step, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. He didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. The yard around them was full of activity marshals documenting horses being managed, Dent's remaining men being dealt with in various practical ways. All of it happening around the two of them as if they were a still point at the center of it. After a while he said, I thought I'd feel more when I finally saw him. What do you feel? Tired, he said, and done with it. He looked at his hands, which is probably the right thing to feel. Yes, she said, I think it is. She sat beside him on the bottom step, close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither of them said anything. The yard went about its business around them, and they sat in the ruined yard while the world reorganized itself around them and waited to become something they could build from. The cleanup took the rest of the day, and the next day, and parts of the day after that, because that's how it works with things that come apart violently. They don't go back together fast. They go back together in stages. First you assess, then you remove. Then you begin the long work of deciding what gets rebuilt and what gets replaced entirely. Falk stayed to help. So did 2 of the marshals who weren't needed immediately elsewhere. They were practical men, and practical men, when faced with a mess that needs clearing, tend to start clearing it without being asked. Nora found this deeply admirable. On the second morning, Breck appeared in the yard before she did, which, given that she'd been awake since 5, was something she noted with interest with a piece of paper covered in numbers. The barn, he said. She looked at the numbers. Dimensions, and materials list, and load calculations. He handed her the paper. I want to start in the spring. Double the footprint of the old one. Better foundation. Proper drainage along the south wall. She studied the paper. This is an ambitious barn, she said. This is an appropriate barn, he said, for what this place is going to become. She looked at him over the top of the paper. What is this place going to become? Whatever we make it, he said. Simply, but larger than it is now. She folded the paper carefully, tucked it in her coat pocket. We'll need help, she said. Hank from the North Pasture does good framework, he said, and the Prentice brothers know foundations. You've been thinking about this for a while. About 6 weeks, he confirmed. She looked at him. At the chair with its iron additions and its ammunition bracket and its battle-worn practical ugliness. At the man in it. The man who, while planning for the possibility of dying, had also been planning for the barn they would build when they didn't. Breckett Crane, she said. You are something else entirely. The corner of his mouth, just that. The trial happened in February. Nora and Breck traveled to the county seat together, 4 hours each way. They didn't talk much on the road, the particular quiet of 2 people who have enough between them that silence is not absence. The courtroom was cold and smelled like old wood and lamp oil and the specific anxiety of official proceedings. Tanner Briggs testified for 40 minutes. He said everything. The approach route. The money Dent had paid him. The specific conversation in which Dent had told him the trapping rights on that section of the mountain were worth more than any single operator's safety. The morning of the slide, what he'd seen, what he'd reported back, all of it on the record. Breck sat beside Nora and listened to his own near-death described in another man's words, and his face did nothing at all. She watched him, not his face, his hands. They were flat on his thighs, still. Not fists, not white-knuckled, just still. The stillness of a man who had already done his reckoning with this, who had carried the question for 3 years and had the answer now and was placing it down carefully and walking away from it. When Tanner finished, Nora reached over. Not his hand, his arm, just above the wrist. The way you hold something you don't want to break. He didn't look at her, but he didn't move away either. Dent was convicted on 11 counts. The circuit judge was removed. The promissory agreement declared void on the grounds of fraudulent inducement. The Callaway land confirmed in Nora's name. The ride home was 4 hours. About 2 hours out, Breck said, "The east fence line. What about it? The posts closest to the road need replacing. Not all of them. The 4 on the north side of the gate." She looked at the road. "You're planning fence work," she said. "I'm always planning fence work," he said. "The fence is always the thing." She thought about that. The fence, which had been mending and half-built, and Harold's work that wasn't quite right and then neglected, and then her problem to solve, and now theirs. To plan and fix and make right. The fence is always the thing. "The 4 north posts," she said. "And the gate hinge while we're at it. It's been stiff since September." "Gate hinge," he confirmed. "And the drainage ditch along the south approach needs clearing before spring thaw." "Add it to the list." "It's already on the list." She looked at him. He was looking at the road, at the land rolling by, at the sky going pink and gold at the edges as the sun finished the day. Home, she thought. We're going home, which was new. The feeling of going to a place that was home in all the ways. Not just the place she'd stayed, not just the place she'd fought for. Home. "Breck. I'm glad you're here." He looked at her. "I know," he said. Not arrogant, just knowing. The way a person knows things they've stopped needing proven. "I'm going to keep saying it," she said. "I know that too," he said. And they drove the last 2 hours home in the easy quiet of people who have nothing left to hide from each other. The wedding happened in April. The yard had been cleared and cleaned and the porch roof properly repaired and the barrel barricades replaced with 2 chairs that Breck had made over the winter from oak salvaged from the broken barn. Practical chairs. Strong. Built to last. She'd never told him she noticed they were a matched set, and he'd never mentioned making them that way, and between 2 people who'd spent 4 months saying exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more, that particular silence meant everything. The day was cold and clear with that April blue that only happens when winter finally admits it's losing. The preacher was a traveling man who'd agreed to stay an extra day. Falk stood to the left in his good coat with his wife beside him. Hank and his 2 oldest boys were there. 3 neighbors who'd been watching the whole business from a distance and had strong feelings about how it had concluded. Nora wore blue. Not borrowed, not adjusted, hers. Breck wore his best shirt and looked precisely like himself, which was what she'd wanted to be looking at. The preacher went through the words. When he got to the vows, Breck said, "I'll take the standard ones and add one thing." The preacher blinked. "Go ahead," Nora said. Breck looked at her. "I was a dead man for 3 years," he said. "Going through the motions because I hadn't figured out how to actually stop yet. And you handed me a pile of broken tack and told me to fix what I could." He paused. "I've been fixing things since, and I don't plan to stop." He held her gaze. "That's the vow. I'll keep fixing things. With you. For as long as there are things to fix." She looked at him for a moment. "I'll take it," she said. Falk cried, quietly. Looked at the sky immediately afterward as if the sky was the reason. His wife caught Nora's eye and smiled with the expression of a woman who has seen this before and finds it entirely reasonable. Hank's boys cheered. Nora kissed Breck first, before the preacher said to. Because she'd been patient for 4 months, and patience in her experience had a natural limit. Breck laughed against her mouth. Real laughter. The warm kind. The kind that belonged entirely to him and didn't exist anywhere else. She decided she'd spend the next 40 years finding reasons to hear it. 5 years later. The barn was finished and had been finished for 3 of those years and had already become the kind of structure that looks like it has always been there. Solid. purposeful. The east wall leaning its quarter-degree that Breck had documented, assessed, and deliberately left. Because things that survive what this place had survived are allowed to be slightly imperfect. The workshop in the south end was known in 3 states. People came for the saddles, the holsters, the rifles that Beckett Crane modified with the particular understanding of a man who has spent decades thinking about the relationship between a weapon and the terrain it operates in. The waiting list was 4 months. People thought that was excessive and waited anyway. The Crane name meant something new, something that had been built rather than inherited, something that existed because of specific choices made by a specific man under specific circumstances, something that would last. Nora ran the ranch. 130 head now, 3 hired hands who did good work and understood that the woman who hired them had opinions about how good work was done. 30 additional acres bought at the Dent land auction for a price she found satisfying in ways she didn't bother to analyze. The fence line was straight, every post, every gate hinge, every drainage ditch cleared before it needed clearing. One September evening she was sitting on the porch in one of the oak chairs watching the light go off the mountains when Breck came out with 2 cups of coffee and settled into the chair beside her. The chair that had always been beside her chair. The chair that had never needed explaining. They drank their coffee in the quiet that belonged to them. The particular quiet of 2 people who have been through a great deal together and have arrived at the other side of it and find the other side unexpectedly livable. "Do you ever think about the auction?" she said. "Most days. What do you think about it?" He turned his cup in his hands. "I think about the crowd," he said. "How they looked at me. What they saw." He looked out at the mountains. "And I think about how wrong they were. Not about the chair, about what the chair meant." He paused. "They thought the chair was the whole story. And the chair was just the chair," he said. "The story was everything else." She looked at him, his face in the September light. The gray eyes that had been furious once and were something else now, not soft exactly, never soft but settled. The hands wrapped around the coffee cup, the hands that made things people came from 3 states to own. "The town did us a favor," she said. He smiled, the real one, wide and genuine and completely his. "Yes," he said. "They did, in the way people do favors when they don't intend to." She looked back at the mountains. They were going blue to purple at the peaks. The Rockies doing what they always did at this hour, being large and indifferent and beautiful and permanent in the way that makes human problems feel appropriately small without making them feel unimportant. Somewhere in those mountains there was a slope, a specific place, where things had gone violently wrong for a man who hadn't deserved it, where the ground had moved and the world had changed and what had seemed like an ending had turned out to be, with time, with work, with 2 people who refused to be finished, something else entirely. A door, maybe, to something neither of them had planned. She reached over and took his hand. He turned his palm up, held on, and the mountains went dark, and the first stars came out, and they sat on their porch in their chairs on their land and watched the sky do what the sky always does when you give it enough time. Open up, and keep going, and keep going, and keep going.